Hello, I'm Elena Campbell, the Executive Director for the Orion Area Chamber of Commerce. On Sunday, June 28th, the Orion Area Chamber utilized the Princess Boat brought to Lake Orion by the Lake Orion Fireworks Association and conducted a historic boat tour of Lake Orion. We highlighted 16 stops on our historical boat tour, and we would love to show you those places today. In 1829, a dam constructed on Paint Creek for a sawmill, built by Jesse Decker, Needham Hemingway, and Philip Bigler, turned 5 small lakes west into one body of water that we now call Lake Orion. In the 1870s, the railroad brought people to Lake Orion from Pontiac and Detroit and facilitated its development as a major lakeside resort. Stop 1 on our tour is Greens Park. In 1874, E.R. Emmons and the Orion Park Association developed what is now Greens Park on the shore of the lake in the village and operated a steam-powered launch for lake excursions. The boat that was used for the excursions was called Little Dick after his son Richard. Many of these excursion passengers were on their way to the Park Island and its amusement park. And we'll come back to Park Island on the end of our tour. Stop 2, the Darling Cottage. Darling Cottage, which was built in 1884, remained in the Darling family through the 1920s. George Darling was in the wine business in Detroit, and he used the property behind the cottage for vineyards. A wine cellar behind the cottage extended 20 feet below ground, and the cottage and wine cellar remain today in original condition. Stop 3 is this beautiful home owned by the Cummins family. The home that sits on Simmons Point today is not the original home. Fred and Emma Simmons built the cottage in 1881 on a point of land then known as Sandy Hook. There was a large boathouse below the cottage, a windmill behind the cottage that provided power for the well, a guest house, and a gazebo. However, the gazebo is all that remains of the original structures on Simmons Point today. Stop 4 is Squaw Island. Squaw Island got its name in 1832 when a group of Native Americans who were camping on the island was credited with saving a local sawmill worker from a fire. In order to honor the Squaws for saving his life, he named the high ground in their honor. A 2-story cottage was built on Squaw Island in the 1800s, and by 1905, under the new owner J.W. Burns, it was known as the most remarkable residence on Lake Orion. Today, only a single tree remains of Squaw Island due to erosion. Stop 5 on the tour is this beautiful home owned by Christian Mills, the owner of Mills Real Estate Ventures. F.M. Sibley of Sibley Lumber in Detroit built this large Greek Revival summer home in 1904. In 1918, Robert and Nancy Stewart became owners and winterized and renamed it Bowden Hall, where they lived year-round with their family until 1926. The south elevation of the mansion and the colonnaded front porch with Corinthian capitals are virtually the same as in 1991, when owned by former Village Council President William Gruby and his wife. Here's video of the cottage shot in 1998 when it was included in Lake Orion's Heritage Tour of Lakeside Homes. Stop 6, John Winter's house. John Winter's summer home was built on 7 lots on a point of land called Point Comfort, later known as Winter's Point. Following his death, Evelyn Marquis's mother bought the summer home in 1941 after the house had been unoccupied for several years. The upstairs of the house was converted to an apartment for Evelyn's retirement, and the downstairs was used as a year-round home for Evelyn's niece Virginia, her husband Charles Veers, and their family. Evelyn claimed that they could see the lake from every window in the house. Stop 7, the Purple Gang's house. According to Kathy Weiser, author of Purple Gang, Terrorizing Detroit in the 1920s, the Purple Gang house was occupied by a mob of bootleggers and hijackers who operated out of Detroit in the 1900s. The gang allegedly received their name during a conversation between two Detroit market owners who'd been victimized by the gang. One of them made the comment, "They're rotten, purple like the color of bad meat." They were known to be some of the most unforgiving bootleggers of their time and may have killed up to 500 members of rival gangs. Stop 8, Pine Island. In the early 1900s, Pine Island and adjacent properties on the mainland were owned by the Coons family, proprietors of a successful jewelry business in Detroit. This area is still known as the Coons subdivision. Frank Danaskis purchased the island and 13 acres from the Coons family in 1947. The main house on the island has since burned, but the Danaskis family continues to own the island and some of the mainland property. Stop 9, Romance Island. Romance Island, informally referred to as Castle Island, has a romantic and tragic history. Soon after the families of Addie Dendell and Lewis Hartman bought the island in the 1880s, they fell in love. The two built a cottage on the island in 1886 and lived happily until Lewis Hartman was tragically killed by a train that struck his car. Abandoned by the 1970s, the cottage was destroyed by fire, and today a chalet-style home occupies Romance Island and utilizes the original stone steps. Stop 10, Dot Island. Dot Island was formerly known as Belle Isle. In the 1920s, a family by the name of Bell owned and summered on the island. In 1985, interior designer Charles Jackson bought Dot Island and transformed the original cottage into a small, beautifully designed island home. Currently, there is new construction taking place on the island. Stop 11, Bubblegum Mansion. This elegant summer home was built for Christian Leidick in the early 1920s. The estate was known as Lake Orion, and Leidick died there in 1932. William Andrews and his wife bought the estate in the 1940s and owned the patent on the penny candy machine and manufactured them in a small basement factory, giving the mansion its more famous name, Bubblegum Mansion. Stop 12, the Hoffa boathouse. Boathouses sat out over the water on piers or were constructed into the breakwall with a boat well. Jimmy Hoffa, who had a cottage on Square Lake, kept his inboard boat in a boathouse on Lake Orion that belonged to homeowner Paul Allen. Here's the former summer home of Jimmy Hoffa as it sits on Square Lake today. It was at this home where Hoffa said goodbye to his wife on his way to a lunch meeting at the Maucus Red Fox in Bloomfield Township on July 30th, 1975. He was never seen again. Stop 13, Preston Island. Preston Island is named for the Preston family who purchased it in the 1920s. Don Preston, his daughter, and her husband built the two existing cottages on the island. The island was purchased by Eugene Jasunas in 1952 and became known as a party island. Today, each half of the island and their cottages are under separate ownership and are not often used. Stop 14, Bellevue Bridge. The wooden footbridge to Bellevue Island was built in 1897 and later used by automobiles until it was replaced by the concrete Bellevue Bridge in 1928. Providing an underpass for boat traffic between the east and west bodies of the lake, boats frequently honked their horns as they passed underneath. Considered to be unsafe, the Camelback Bridge was demolished in 1998 and replaced with the bridge you see today. Stop 15, the Boat Club. Originally known as Bradford's Island, in 1897, Sweet's Island was purchased by Reverend John Sweet, a prominent Detroit minister. He was one of the founders of the Assembly Resort Association in 1898, and his island became known as Sweet's Island. In 1961, it was purchased by the Lake Orion Boat Club. The original boathouse is still used by the Lake Orion Boat Club today. On our final stop, 16, is Park Island. In 1874, the Orion Park Association purchased Island Park, now known as Park Island, and constructed a bridge to the island where they built a 100-foot-long reception hall topped with an 80-foot-high observation tower. In the summer months, thousands of people per week would visit the park for its thriller roller coaster, carousel, penny arcade, and many other amusement park activities. In the winter, activities such as sports car racing and skating races on the ice were popular. After several fires destroyed the remaining structures on the island in 1964, there was not much left from the park. So Bill Davis purchased Park Island and developed it with lakefront homes. I hope you enjoyed this brief historic tour of Lake Orion. We know there's so much more history to share, so we hope you'll join us in 2016 when we include more stops of our tour of the lake. The Orion Area Chamber of Commerce would like to thank everyone who worked very hard putting together this historic tour, especially Christian Mills, owner of Mills Real Estate Ventures, Kelly McDonald, owner of the Goddard School, Lake Orion, Anthony Reard, owner of M&B Graphics, and the Lake Orion Fireworks Association. Thanks for watching.